I have a feeling, I have a very strong feeling, but my level of confidence of how willing I am to put that out there
Right.
is how much of the shield I've built up. Do I have the facts? Do I have the experience? Do I have, other people who, I trust agreeing with me? I think we need more mental health education.
Okay. Okay. So more mental health education. So you want to teach mental health. So
Yeah.
like mental hygiene, I guess.
Yeah, so let me clarify a little bit what I mean by kind of mental health education.
Okay.
Um, I think there are a bunch of skills around things like emotional regulation, critical thinking, interpersonal skills with people, um, that kind of often get taught as a part of therapy or when you end up in the mental health system, because you're experiencing symptoms already.
Right.
My opinion here is that I think a lot of that information, a lot of that education is really broadly useful, not just once you get in therapy, and that we need to bring that kind of education, bring that kind of skill learning into a broader population earlier than when they're already having a crisis of some sort.
Okay. So like coping strategies or how to deal with emotional upsets or stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. How to deal with extreme feelings, how to deal with boundaries being crossed, how to feel with feeling like your needs aren't getting met. What does self-care mean? We hear self-care and mindfulness constantly, I feel like, in the media and pop psychology these days, as they're really good things to do, but what does that mean? Are those skills that we can bring to people earlier? If they're so valuable, why are we only telling adults that they should start doing them when they're burned out at work?
Right. Okay. In a way, it kind of makes me think of it's almost like you're advocating for financial education, like basic financial education, right? The idea that it's not just business people who need to know about finance, it's anybody who has a checkbook or a credit card or a
Yeah, I
wallet.
mean, I think in a lot of ways, our educational system has perhaps not done a great job of covering all life skills.
Right.
We do, a lot of academic stuff, but
Right.
home ec electives got dropped.
Yeah.
You you
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
you take accounting maybe as an elective.
Right.
Even health and physical, PE, like those have still kind of hung on, but I feel
Yeah.
like, we're dropping out the running around part of gym, let alone having a comprehensive health education, whatever that means. So
So what I'm hearing is like the same way that learning about home ec and balancing your checkbook might be useful to have these basic skills in. So would dealing with strong emotions and how to deal with upsets and this kind of stuff.
stress.
Right,
Yeah,
stress. Like who doesn't experience stress?
exactly.
I'm sure there's some people. Uh, yeah,
Lucky people.
yeah,
Yeah, I think there's a lot of thought at some point the stress becomes pathological, right? You're talking about
right,
maybe someone having an anxiety disorder or major depression. But certainly stress happens before that. Certainly
right,
strong emotions
right.
happen well before that.
And even people who don't have like a disorder might benefit from knowing these strategies. That's kind of where you're coming
That's
from,
my
right?
claim. That is
Okay.
my claim, that pretty much everyone can benefit from a base level of mental health education, where we define mental health education as kind of that skill building for dealing with your emotions and other people in your life,
Yeah.
and just your self-regulation.
Okay. Um, I think I understand the concept. So you said you used the word early. I think early education. Um, like for home ec, for example, there was a class. I mean, I took a home ec class in high school, I guess. Um, are you suggesting we should put this in classrooms, or should, like, how do we educate the youth?
Yeah, that's a loaded question, because I don't actually. I think the answer to that question is that I don't have a good
Okay.
answer. But if you had to ask me, given the current system that exists right now, I think that schools are, probably the only thing that has, remotely broad reach to the population I'm talking about. I
Right.
think there's quite a bit of research that says, um, brain development finishes happening around 25. I would be advocating that this is stuff you want before that, and if you want to hit a broad population, yes, I think somewhere between elementary school to high school is the only place right now where you can hit that much of the population, if that makes sense.
So certainly in terms of age, it makes sense. I mean, I don't think it's hard to even imagine someone saying, "I don't know what you're talking about, stress." Right? Like I think everybody, even at age 14, has experienced stress. Stress
Mm-hmm.
about dating, or stress about tests, or stressed about their parents, right?
Yeah.
Um, okay, so certainly the younger that you teach this, the more benefit that it'll have. Um, I guess the question becomes like where it gets taught, and because
Yeah.
it seems it actually, maybe this is going to be a really useful analogy, but the idea of home ec, or even art or music, right? I don't think there's many people who would disagree that like kids should study art or be given the opportunity to study art. The question is, does it make sense to study less mathematics in order to make room for studying art?
Yeah, absolutely. Balancing anything is going to be, a huge problem. There's already things that are getting cut from education, and there's already,
Right.
we don't have a big enough push on XYZ. um
And maybe, I mean, from my own experience at least, school was pretty stressful already. So like it might
yes.
actually, giving, like adding to their workload might actually make them more stressed out.
So let's actually take school and put it aside for a second, because I
Okay.
have some other thoughts about balancing school, and actually I think that question speaks to priorities that actually need to be talked about at a much higher level
Okay.
than any kind of individual school. Um, to the answer, I started giving this answer with within the current system, what do I think exists?
Sure.
And um, I think honestly, to your point, I'm not sure school is the best place for it long term. I would love a different answer. Um, I think realistically, it's hard to imagine putting that structure into place right now.
Okay.
That structure needs something that's going to be accessible to, all students at a certain grade level. Um, it's something that, not just opt in, not just something that people can afford, right? So it's got to be something that's free, basically, right? Like this isn't, if we're expecting people to pay for some class, that's obviously
Uh-huh.
not going to make it accessible. There needs to be staff, obviously, to do this. This isn't
Sure.
something that can happen
And
at a very small level.
and
And
I would
so,
assume like trained staff.
agree.
There's
Yes,
certainly
exactly.
concerns with like these people need to know what they're talking about.
For sure, for sure.
Right.
Um, and so that makes the question of, what kind of structure could we set up to do this outside of school.
Right.
um, it feels like we need something federal, very well funded, very well sponsored. In our current like political climate, that just feels like a bunch of dead ends to me. I tend to be a pretty pragmatic person, and that is kind of why I give the answer of school, not because I
Okay.
think it's a good answer, but
Yeah.
because I think it's the only answer we have to work with.
So before, okay, um, so what I'm hearing is school. This is a lot to repeat back. I should have done this earlier, but um, we want to reach young people because people are suffering from these problems. They can benefit from these things early on,
Mm-hmm.
um, and school is already an institution that's in place that essentially everybody goes to, until whatever, fifth grade or sixth grade at least, just about. And so it, like, as a first pass, it makes sense to maybe think of school as being an opportunity. But then on the other hand, maybe school isn't a great place because there's a lot of stuff going on there already. Um, okay, and then I think another component is you want to make sure it is accessible. So if we aren't talking about school, we have to start talking about, well, funding issues for like getting these programs in place, even though they're not going to the stuff. So it's a lot of we've touched on a lot of things already, right?
Yeah.
Did I capture most of it there?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
that's pretty fair.
Before we slice off this head of the Hydra, is it possible that this could be done like in home?
Sorry, I'm just typing a note to you.
Sure.
Is it possible that this could be done in the home? I think that gets to your question about well-trained people doing this. Are there, I think there are materials that can kind of be self-taught. And I think that if you have a parent as an educator, right? Like let's say if you're doing this in the home, presumably you have a parent as an educator, right? Or some adult as an educator. I don't think the solution is fourth graders teach themselves, which mean, okay, we have an adult that needs to do the curriculum. I would argue that that breaks the accessibility concern. I think that a lot of students, and in particular students who this program may be the most beneficial for, something where you have coping skills, you have learning about boundaries, you have learning about self-care. The households that may need this the most may be the ones with the least likely to have, a stable adult figure in the home that,
Sure.
is even available to teach this, let alone has the emotional capacity to teach this. I think, this is something that I could even see in a phased approach where if you teach it to kids in schools, is it something that they could eventually teach their own kids? Maybe. But if we think that we want adults to teach it to kids now, we're going to somehow have to teach it to adults first, because I don't think these are skills that in general the population has either.
So I'm hearing concerns about whether the parents have enough time or experience to be able to actually teach these things effectively. Is that?
Yeah.
That's the idea. Okay. The other thing that sort of came to mind immediately was like recreational sports, right? So when I was a kid, I played baseball or basketball with something done by organized by the community. Do you think that is a potential avenue for this?
Did you pay anything to be in that
I
sport?
don't think so. I think it was,
Okay.
yeah.
I know that I've paid at least for some level, but I don't, like, it may have been a cheap or, situation where it could have been funded if,
Yeah.
My parents were not in a.
If I remember right, I think it was funded by selling concessions. So
Okay.
so they would sell hot dogs and whatever, and that would pay for the, I don't know, bats and balls and things like that.
Sure. I think that is an interesting question. I mean, honestly, even at the the thing I'm going to come back to here is accessibility, and frankly, I'm going to come back to it as soon as we talk about stuff in schools. If you have an affluent community who can
Yeah.
afford to pay for snacks or workbooks, or the Harvard educated psychologists to
Right.
lead their community groups, versus
Yeah. Yeah.
the poorer communities.
There's big asymmetries. So I'm really hearing that for you, accessibility is a big important part of this. Like, because
Yes.
otherwise you're going to wind up with richer, more well-to-do kids who already have other advantages getting more advantages, and maybe the people who need it the most because their parents work all the time and they don't can't talk to them about the things that they're stressed about, stuff like that. They're not getting the help. Is that
There's a ton of studies out there about trauma, basically trauma in kids, and trauma looks, anything like getting, actual physical abuse to, just a parent who's absent, because maybe they're working super long hours, maybe it's a
sure?
divorce situation, and not to say that all of these things, mess kids up entirely, but these adverse childhood experiences, as they call them, is one of the best predictors for teenagers and young adults having mental health concerns. And so yeah, if whatever education system we design um, you know isn't designed in a way to kind of intentionally target those weak areas, we're just going to create more disparity. And I think, you know, for all the mental health community is great at, I think mental health community promotes a lot of, wellness and well-being and doing what's good for yourself. It's a system like any other at this point that has some accessibility issues, for people without money, for people without time, for people, if you have a LGBTQ issue and you're living in rural Kansas, can you find the provider you need to really talk through your issue?
Sure.
Sorry, just kind of took a giant tangent, but I think
No, I think that really underscores like the accessibility part of this is very important to you.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I've suggested maybe a couple of things: school, at home, and maybe community things. And I felt pushback from you on all three of those. Is there one that you are willing to champion?
Um, I think schools and or I can see arguments for both schools and communities.
Or is there maybe a different one that I haven't even thought of?
So I think the problem is that neither schools nor I would probably put households to the side. I think the problem with both um, schools and communities, is partly the accessibility, is partly a priority
Yeah.
issue, right? Like neither of these work until either the broader community, the broader school, whoever's, this is a very wonderful idea to have, and with no funding and no professionals behind it, like it's just a
Right.
wonderful idea, right?
Right.
And so I I think the conversation is actually how do you convince people that it's a priority, not where do you put it, because the where do you put it problem isn't going to be solved until people actually think it's an important problem to solve.
So do you think that it's an important problem to solve?
Yes.
Okay. Would you be willing to prioritize it over other things that are being taught in schools?
Yes.
Um, could you be concrete? Like, what would you be
Yeah,
willing to
yeah,
get rid of?
yeah. To be honest, quite a lot. I don't want to hark back to too much of the conversation. We had kind of talking a little bit about this before, but I think that critical thinking is a skill that is perhaps almost more important than all others.
Okay.
I think that we are having a bit of a crisis in this country right now because there's a very big polarization, divide, and there's not a lot that people on, either extreme can agree on anymore. And both sides kind of have their own version of truth. And where I'm going with this is that, I think that's really destructive. And the skill that seems to be missing is the ability to pick apart this emotional reasoning.
Yeah.
What seems to exist is I have an emotion, therefore I believe this, and there's no space between that
Yeah.
kind of reaction and that.
Okay.
And so, yeah, so I think that, it's great to teach higher level, so let's take history for an example, right? Like I can teach you a bunch of.
Let's not delve
Sorry.
into the. No. It's perfectly fine. I just before we go into the specifics, I feel like we've hit upon the root of your claim, which is that it's not just because everybody thinks we should be teaching art or we should be teaching PE and we should be teaching home ec and we should be teaching math. You're actually willing to say this is more important than some of the things we're already teaching.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that maybe is the root of your claim.
That's fair, yeah.
Before we go into all the details and before I even try to push back on this, how confident are you that this is true? So to restate it one more time, that teaching mental health skills to younger people is actually maybe more important than some of the stuff they're learning in school now. How confident are you about this claim?
It's an interesting question because I don't think I've made it in those words until about 30 seconds ago. So
I hope I'm not putting words in your
no,
mouth.
no, you're not. I
Okay.
completely agree with it. It's just not. I tend to find that I have thoughts in my brain that have not exactly formed into words, and so I agree. This is something I
Yeah.
agree with. This is my
Yeah.
thoughts in words, but I don't have a document I can point to and be like, yes, this is why I believe it. So putting I guess I want to answer that question in different ways. My emotional feelings on it are very strong. I'm willing to give that, a 98%, like I feel this in my heart, it's right. In
Okay.
my I have thoroughly researched this and definitely have facts for you that I'm willing to go stake my life on. I don't know, I probably am about 75% confident that I can fully back this claim up.
Okay. So I'm gonna try something that I haven't really tried before, but um, because it's interesting putting these two perspectives, right? Your emotional confidence and your maybe intellectual confidence. Um, I'm gonna try like improving the operational part of this claim. So I'm gonna try to making it more concrete.
Okay.
Because and please stop me if I'm saying something that you're not on board with, but I'm willing to bet that you're interested in the well-being of these young people.
Sure.
Okay.
Yep.
So I think the claim really comes down to if we got rid of an hour a week of, now I don't know what it might be, math, history, social studies, PE, whatever people are learning now doesn't really matter. But we're going to get rid of an hour of it, and we're going to insert an hour of how to deal with your emotional state, how to think critically, these kinds of things.
Mm.
And 30 years down the road, we did studies on these people, and we saw how they were living their lives, and we saw how many of them had shitty stuff going on, how many of them maybe self-harming, how many of them had relationships that they would ascribe positive attributes to, like all these things that we might consider well-being.
Sure.
How confident are you that these kids would be better off than the kids who go through health now? Is it still 70?
Um, I mean, if you're only gonna give me an hour a week in the current system as set up, like no. I mean, that's I think that's a pretty strong claim.
Would you be so this is perfect. So if I gave you more than an hour, 2 hours, five
Yeah.
hours, would your
I
confidence actually go up or would it stay the same?
I think if you gave me some time, whatever, to go off and I, thought about this, talked to some experts,
Sure, sure.
whatever, and we devised a program that, we feel pretty confidently about, and because for whatever reasons, and we come back and I say, I need 4 hours, I need 4 hours a week. This is, we figured out the program, whatever. I'm ready to get rid of 4 hours of math and history, whatever. Um, yeah, I mean, I think my confidence would go up. I think it would be really silly to wait 30 years before we did any studies on it.
Sure. Yeah, of course. I'm just trying to paint like as stark a picture as possible. Like, because after 30 years, we could really tell, did these people benefit in their lives? You know. Um,
Sure, but why? I mean, why are you only looking at something, you know, longitudinally, right? Like, this is the sort of program that I imagine you design for a couple of years, get a ton of feedback on, keep evolving over time.
of course, I'm not trying to say this is how we should do the experiment. I'm
Sorry.
just in terms of like making it easy to evaluate confidence. I was thinking the because um, let's touch this a little bit, because I guess I can imagine that it might help people in the short term, but not necessarily in the long term. And so
Okay.
I was thinking, and maybe this is me jumping the gun here, but I guess if it only helped people in the short term, but not in the long term, I would imagine that you'd be less confident that this was a good thing.
Agreed.
Okay, and that and the flip side, right? If it helped people in the long term, but not necessarily in the short term, it actually might still be a good idea.
Yes. I think, some of this is definitely about individual well-being. I want well-being for individuals, but yeah, I would say some of it is about the well-being of, humanity as a whole, let's say it. I think that, if we could separate everyone out into individual bubbles and make each bubble, really, really happy, but then as soon as they interact with each other, everything blows up, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm not sure we've really done any good there.
Right. Okay, all right. That was all. That was all I was sort of getting to. I was actually trying to make it easier to talk about, but maybe it made it more complicated. Um, but okay, so going back to what you were saying, I heard you say that if you went off and with a team of experts came up with a plan that said X hours, then you'd be more confident.
I think so, yeah.
Um, that's an interesting hypothetical, and I think it's that team of experts that's making you more confident. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I say, a team of experts, but I think it's important to talk about, what I would assume the makeup of that team is.
Sure.
I don't think a team of experts is a team of experts if it includes, you know, three top-rated psychiatrists, right? Like I think,
Yeah.
I think it's actually an important point, right? When people say, "Oh, I'm going to trust what the experts say," there's, I think, certainty can come from a few different areas, right? Certainty can come from my experience. I know this, it happened to me. Certainty can come from the experts who say, here's the science, here's the fact. I did a study. This is what, my paper says. Um, there's probably kind of like a community sense of certainty where you're just like, well, everyone, everyone around me in my bubble believes this, so like
Right.
it's probably right. And so when I say I want a team of experts, I don't mean I want a team who can find me a bunch of facts. I mean, I want people who have been working with children, right now. Maybe who even aren't professional psychologists, but are the people who are working, at a YMCA in a low income area, seeing, the kids who are coming to play basketball every day, but then breaking down in the bathroom crying afterwards. Like I want one of those people as an expert on my team. I want someone on my team who thinks, that the math and science education in this country is horrific, and that's why we're so far behind, China and whatnot, and we can't possibly get rid of any math
Okay.
education, or, like it's
You're saying
you
you
don't
also want experts on the team who are championing we need more mathematics, not less mathematics.
I don't think you can get a full perspective on an issue if you're only looking at people who agree with you. Like that doesn't, if I come with my great experts or whatever who are all psychologists and they all work on
Right.
children behavior, right? And those are the only people on my team,
They all
and I
want
bring
there to
it
be more jobs for psychologists.
right, and I bring it to the math teachers, or or the history teachers. They're going to be like,
Right.
cool, what about all of our arguments? Like you didn't take, like, you just got rid of 4 hours of math. Like
Right.
I have some really fantastic arguments for my
Right.
4 hours of
Right.
math.
It's hard to build bridges without math.
Yes,
I mean, literal
exactly.
bridges. Yeah. As opposed
Yeah,
to figurative bridges. Yeah, you're interested in building figurative bridges, but the people who want to build real bridges might say, well, maybe you should learn calculus instead.
exactly. And so yeah, when I say I want a team of experts to go off and design this curriculum, it's not a bunch of psychologists. It's also the people who have designed the current curriculum. It's the people, we just did a whole overhaul of a bunch of curriculum for Common Core reasons, and I personally believe in a lot of what Common Core stands for, particularly in the math realm. I also agree that it was rolled out really poorly, and like people weren't given the resources to teach it correctly, and so it's kind of been a disaster. And I
So
absolutely,
before we go down the no, there's so many interesting things to talk about when it comes to childhood education. But I just want to go back to I heard you say that you might be at 70% using logic and reason, not emotion
sure.
today. Is that
Hmm.
is that right?
Uh, why are you emphasizing today?
As opposed to before you meet with your team of experts.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Um, okay. So I'm gonna try to push back right on this idea. That's the point of this. Um, and it sounds like we've already touched on some of these things, right? You're already considering it's possible that if we get rid of X, right? Because let's say kids are in school for 8 hours a day. I don't know exactly, but whatever. They're already doing stuff, right? There's not much downtime, so
No.
we have to get rid of something. Um, what is getting you to 70% that getting rid of something else might not hurt them more than the benefit that they'd gain?
Yeah. So I think there's two sides of that question. One is my evaluation of the value of other things,
Okay,
and one is my evaluation of the worth of doing
sure,
mental health stuff.
right,
I think my confidence in why the mental health piece is important. Um, a lot of that comes from experience, which maybe feels like it belongs in the emotional bucket, but I've I've gone to therapy for almost 20 years now. In that time, I have learned a lot. And I've seen myself put it in practice at work, when I'm, managing a discussion. I've seen myself put it into practice when I'm, really, really stressed out. And
Sure.
it's not,
Probably
it's
in
not
just
just my it's not just in my sense of like, oh, I feel better. I've also had people, either comment on how do you do that? Where,
right.
where did you learn? Where did you get those skills? And so some of my 70% belief is in this. I've seen it over and over again that these are skills that I have, that I know I learned in therapy, that I know other people have learned in therapy. Like those
Right.
are the places I see people learning these skills. And they've been very useful to us. And I see myself teaching them to people who haven't learned these skills and who are not, who don't have a mental health diagnosis, because of that, haven't been exposed to therapy,
Right.
because of that, haven't been exposed to some of these skills. So
Right.
so that part, there's a part that is my experience and my experience of other people's experiences, feeling this has taught us a lot, and this has allowed us to improve our lives and improve our interaction.
And that would include skills, you say, like emotional regulation, but also just things like how to talk to people who disagree with you. I
Absolutely.
feel like
Yeah.
that would certainly come into play at a job, for example.
Yes. I think one of the things that I, got comments on being good at my job was being able to take two people who were arguing, figure out what kind of the key point of their argument was, and translating between the two of them. Like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, you guys are really upset about thing A, but they don't actually care about thing A. They just really want thing B done. So like, can we just make thing B happen? Because thing A is,
Right.
difficult.
All
Anyway,
right.
yeah.
So this is one half. I hear that you feel quite confident that this is a beneficial skill.
Yes.
So what about the other half of the equation? How do you know that that getting rid of studying some other subject might not hurt people?
Yeah. And I think there's actually a third thing that I want to throw in here when I get done with it.
Okay.
How do I know that getting rid of some subjects won't hurt people? I don't. I think that's
Okay.
part of where my, not having 100%
So that's
confidence
what
comes
brings you
in.
down to 90, 70, sorry.
Yeah, I think so. The things that bring it not down to like 50 or 0, I guess would, again, here's personal experience, but there is a lot of, various math and science that I have learned in school and forgotten and never used again. So there's that argument, which is really easy to make.
Sure.
There's also a second argument, which is that I think anything you teach in the mental health space actually potentially potentiates other learning.
Sure. It's like a
This is a little bit,
multiplier.
yeah, this is a little bit hard to see in maybe something like math, for example. But something like history, history has quite a bit of critical thinking, involved. It's not just fact happened,
Yeah.
why did things happen? How did this happen? And so I think there's some argument to be made of, and how do you measure this? That's very hard. But I think there's definitely an argument to be made of, okay, I got rid of an hour of social studies, but I replaced it with an hour of all of your teaching for the next 4 years is way more effective.
Right. Yeah. I think, I mean, I can imagine
Yeah.
that it would even help in something like mathematics, right? Like
Yeah.
how many students have math anxiety, or, I mean, I studied math as an undergrad, and I can't begin to tell you how many people who, upon learning that, say, "Oh my God, I hate math. I am scared of math. Get it out of here. Give me letters," stuff like that.
Yeah.
But okay, so
The third thing I wanted to say about why I'm also, actually now I want to say 60%, is because I think all of this is very hard to do. I think I'm painting a really ideal picture of, if you just teach people these
right.
skills, like
You
they'll be
sit
better
30
off.
you sit 30 10-year-olds down in a classroom,
Right.
and you say, when you experience a strong emotion, you should slow down and think about there's something from Sesame Street, stop and think it through.
Right.
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 How?
Daniel Tiger has a lot of great songs too.
Yeah. Okay.
When you feel so mad that you want to roar, take a deep breath and count to 4. Yeah, get those
Fantastic.
learnings in.
So you're saying that thinking about how this actually might happen in practice is already maybe pushing you from 70 to 60?
On the like total confidence right now, yeah. I mean, it's I don't. So I guess the question is, I'm not sure I'm changing my feelings on my original claim of it's important.
Mm.
Like, I, in terms of like, man, any way to implement it or any way that like actually makes it like a
So,
practical claim,
so just so I
like that's
understand,
hard.
that's kind of like the first half of the balance beam. Is
Yeah.
that right? The first half being that this would be helpful unto itself,
Yeah.
right? Versus, if we do it at the expense of getting rid of something else, maybe that might not balance out. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, I don't even think it's what we would have to get rid of. Like, we can break this down. I'm just going to throw this out there, but I'm actually on the scale of, do I think these skills are helpful? Very, very high. On the scale of,
Can we teach
frankly, do
them?
I think we can replace something else with them? Pretty high too. Like,
Okay,
I would want to explore my feelings more detailed
sure.
about, do I think they could replace them? But the thing I
But I
am
think
least confident on,
this third point is, can we teach them in school to 10-year-olds?
can we teach them effectively to,
Right.
yeah, the age group I'm talking about, whether it's schools, whether it's community, like, can we do this in any effective way at a broad
And
scale?
that's maybe where you're least confident?
Yes,
Okay.
for sure.
Okay, so let's just talk about, like, what could you learn that might move you up the scale and becoming more confident? Like, what would you have to know? What could you find out?
um so I mean, I think a huge thing would be, yeah, so first, some actual like agreement at some higher level that like we're honestly seeing this as a priority. I think that, you know, let's say in a hypothetical world, we get some random bill passed that says, yeah, we should have money for this, right? Great. I think the priority question where you're asking like, are people going to put this above math? Are people going to make sure we're getting the best teachers from it? Is it something where it's just going to be, okay, you said I have to do an hour a week, Tuesday afternoons at 2:30, we'll shove it in, right? So I think the first question is needing to see it be an actual priority, not a line
Okay.
budget item priority, but actually seeing mental health education as something more
So
broadly agreed upon.
so what I'm hearing is that if if society were more in agreement that this were priority, you would be more confident that it's correct. Is that
That
right?
it's correct.
That this is true.
I think it becomes more correct that it's true, that is likely to work. Not that it's not that its importance changes.
Do you think that a large group of people could believe something works without it actually working?
I mean, again, in our current climate, like, no, that's a huge
Because
problem.
because because it's so hard to get people to agree. Is that where you're coming from?
Well, yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about how I think this kind of certainty comes out, and some of it is personal, some of it's the expert, some of it's the group think or whatever, right? And so I think if all you have is experts coming out saying, "Hey, we did this study, here's some numbers, we got a plan," is that going to convince people who have no personal experience or whose group norms doesn't say it's important, probably not.
So just to make sure, excuse me, just to make sure we're on the same page, what I heard you say is that, and maybe I missed something, but if a larger percentage, maybe a large percentage of society was in favor of this plan,
Mm-hmm.
that would make you more confident that the plan would work. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I asked, right, is it possible for a large group of society to be in favor of a plan and it not work out?
Oh, okay.
Like how
Yeah.
does the confidence of society relate to the truth of what they believe?
How does the confidence of society relate to the truth of what they believe? So, I mean, this gets into an interesting question of what is truth, I guess.
Okay.
And I think that, what is true for any group of people is unfortunately not necessarily what is true for a different group of people. And so I think that, yeah, if a group of people doesn't believe in an idea, it's not going to work. If a group of people do believe in an idea, is it going to work? I don't know. That's the next question that we have to ask. But I think if, it's kind of a prerequisite. If you don't have, well, in a lot of cases, it's kind of a prerequisite. If you don't have general support for something that you need everyone to be involved in, it's hard to make it work.
So this is specifically about like plans for social change, I guess. Is that where you're coming from?
Yeah, so I guess like the reason I'm mentioning, if we want to get mental health education to everyone, right? Because the idea is that we got to basically start with everyone, not just a select group of kids. I think there needs to be, there doesn't just need to be buy-in from psychological experts. There needs to be a buy-in from all the educational experts. There needs to be buy-in from the people who are going to fund it. There needs to be buy-in, from a lot of different directions. And I think that it's very easy to shut down an idea when there's a direction where it's just getting no support from.
So the idea is that if there is a lack of support for this in the general society, that the plan won't receive the support it needs to thrive. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, basically, I think
Okay.
that, yeah.
So I hope you'll excuse me. I'm going to go back and ask the question again because I still feel like we haven't quite gotten to it. But I definitely hear where you're coming from, right? Like if there isn't support, like let's just imagine, on a whim, some person enacted this into law, like whatever, but nobody agreed with them. People would try throwing wrenches in it. They would be petitioning it. They would do everything they could to stop it, right? And that would, of course, not help.
Right.
But I'm really asking kind of the converse of this. Is it possible that, like, a majority of people believed that it would work,
Mm-hmm.
and then it actually failed?
Yes.
Okay. So what is it about people being confident in your belief that actually makes you more confident? If they can be wrong about it.
I don't think that people in general agreeing on a priority is a sufficient condition.
Okay.
I think it's maybe a necessary condition. I think if you don't have it,
for social change, especially.
Yeah, let's say 98% on a lot of these cases, because I can probably come up with one or two exceptions here or there. But yeah, I think if you don't have a societal agreement for it, that's not going to help. Now, if you do have a societal agreement for it, is that sufficient? No.
Okay.
That's where, I'd start bringing in, um, like, do we actually have funding for this? Do we actually have, some program where we're going to teach, the people who are teaching this? Is there a plan for either teaching the teachers, or is there a plan for, hiring more people, right? So I think the confidence doesn't just come from everyone thinks it's a good idea. The
Okay.
confidence comes from, okay, people think it's a good idea. That allows us to get more, governmental support or whatever. That allows us to actually fund it. And if we can fund it without people, if we can fund it while we have, societal support, we get more money. If we fund it while we have societal support, we get people who are excited about it, right? Like, you don't want a teacher going into this program who's been told, oh, I have to do it, and the government,
Sure.
the
Okay.
school district is pushing it down.
So I think the message that I'm really getting out of this little bit of the conversation is, like, when you're talking about a program for change, whether or not society agrees with it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with, like, whether it would work factually, but that
No.
that that support is important just for getting the money, for making sure that it doesn't get shut down, for making sure that, like if parents believe their kids should go to it, then they encourage them to go to it. Like, these sort of things all require the support of the community. Is that kind of where you're coming from?
Yeah, I think
And
that
so
this kind
having
of,
that support brings you up in terms, like, well, at least all the things that are needed will be in place.
at least some of them, right? Like,
Right, right, right.
there's enthusiasm, there's money, there's
Okay.
teachers or whatever. And I think if you don't have enthusiasm, my confidence is going to go down because,
All right. Hypothetical.
yeah.
Imagine society. Imagine this video goes viral. People love your idea. Right. Both parties get behind it. Everyone is thrilled. Um, how confident would you be that it will benefit these kids to enact this plan?
I mean, like, again, today, not like
Okay.
I'm not. I think it's very problematic to start from nothing and assume that you have the
Okay.
answer.
Fantastic. That's kind of what I was interested in. So okay, so then the question becomes: let's say you're at 70. Let's say everybody loves the idea. Maybe you're at 75, something like that. Whatever. What would get you to 90? What would we have to do or learn hypothetically
Yeah.
to go to 90?
So I think I have pretty strong beliefs that the skills in general are valid. Like, just as a concept, I think teaching emotional, like, I'm pretty good on that. But I think there'd have to be a huge, like, some way to validate that we can actually teach this in a way that is accessible to that cohort. Like, I haven't
Okay.
seen any, wide studies on what happens if we try to teach some of these coping skills, some of these interpersonal skills to a bunch of 10-year-olds.
Okay.
Like,
So
can we do that effectively?
I'm hearing studies. If we did studies, it would start to raise
Yeah.
you up.
So
Um,
studies would help. I mean, personal, like, I'd want to, like, I think it would help me feel really good if someone came out of this program, if they took it in middle school, whatever, and they graduated high school or were going to
okay.
college, right? And they were like, I want to go to school to
Right.
be a part of this program. Like, I want to be a part of it and then give back. Like, if you
Right.
see people for whom it's working for, who want to, get back into it, I think that's another good
So
indicator.
this kind of goes back to the thing we touched on before, which is that it's important that it both helps people immediately, and that you could do studies. This school has this program, this school doesn't. These kids are happier. They're not running away. They're not quitting school. Whatever, that kind of thing.
Right.
but you'd also want to see studies about how they impact people down the road.
Yeah.
Like like it's conceivable that they really liked they really liked the program as a kid, but then 10 years later they were thinking, this didn't really help me. I still feel terrible, right? Stuff
Yeah,
like that.
or we somehow taught, the wrong message about, like, we taught boundaries are important, and that
Right,
was great for you as a kid because you cut off your toxic,
right,
best friend, but now you're a 30-year-old who has continued cutting off all people
right.
because I learned boundaries were good.
Um, yeah, that sounds like a great example of right. It seems like maybe another one might be there's fewer people who are going into STEM because maybe their science education was cut.
Yep.
So it seems like maybe the longitudinal thing matters to you, and that to figure that out would require studies.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of other, I think it, you could do broad population surveys, versus,
Right,
but, yeah, I mean, I think you do want to, I don't think you necessarily only want to look at people's reported,
right.
self-reported well-being, but, like, yeah, I'd want to look at how is the country as a whole doing,
Okay,
and I mean, that's hard to tease out because there's not only going to be
sure.
one thing that changes at any time. But yeah, I mean, the whole reason I propose something around mental health education is because I feel that the skills are very valuable both personally and as a society for us
Yeah,
to, continue interacting nicely.
of course. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think what I hear you saying is like to get to 90 requires like hard evidence.
Almost certainly. Like, I'm
Okay.
struggling to come up with a situation where I wouldn't want at least some,
All right.
facts.
Fantastic. So what would bring you down from something? What could we learn hypothetically um, that might make you less confident in this idea?
I mean, some of it I think we've, already briefly talked about. If
Yeah,
we get bad data back, like,
sure.
that's not good. And I think some of that is longitudinal studies saying, like, oh, these people now have boundary
Right.
issues. What happens? Some of it is feedback, right after the class, right? If you teach a 10th grader and they come out of it going, that stuff was super stupid. I hate thinking about thinking, right? You've probably done something, that probably wasn't your, intention. And I think that is, a really clear signal for, like, hey, we need to pull back
Yeah.
on this. I think, I mean, honestly, I think in general, I talk about this being broad to everyone and accessible to everyone, but that's not, you can't roll out something to the, I do not feel you should roll out something, to the entire country without, having validated it on, probably
Yeah.
a much smaller population first. It's, I have a dream world where we can just roll this out immediately and everyone has mental health education, and, like, that that's not realistic. It's not.
So um, giving that idea of the kid coming out of the class and being sort of thinking about thinking is terrible. It made me think of something, and this might be a little bit pointy.
Go for it.
Okay, but I was thinking. I wonder if I guess that maybe can you imagine a case where these kids are in these classes and they're being told, look, it's important to establish or not establish boundaries, whatever is best. It's important. It's important that when someone says something that hurts your feelings, to maybe not act on that. Think it through, and then they start to realize, well, geez, my parents are hurting me. They yell at me, or whatever, and they blame things on me, and I feel like that's not fair. Do you think that maybe this process actually might bring up pain, or might cause these kids to actually suffer. Maybe it might introduce additional friction between them and their parents.
Yes. There's three things I want to go with for that I'm going to forget about.
But feel free to write them down if
Yeah,
it would help.
different points that I want to address here. First, just totally validating that as I think a reasonable concern. This is a slightly different example, but they have shown repeatedly that people who go under hypnosis can kind of have these suggested experiences that are,
Sure.
maybe not fully factual. And
There
so
was a big problem in the 80s with this. I know that, yeah.
right. And so I absolutely am very sensitive to, and I've even had friends who, went to a counselor once and came out of it with, oh my gosh, was my boyfriend the worst person in the world? And like, no, the answer was that counselor got a one-sided perspective and,
Yeah.
went that way. So I think the first thing I want to do is just totally validate that that's a real concern that would need to be addressed. The second thing I would say is honestly one of the biggest criticisms towards myself that I can come up with this idea that we haven't really touched on is that this is a great program. This hypothetical program is great for maybe kids who are not experiencing ongoing trauma. Telling you, a lot of coping skills or whatever will ask you to kind of start with imagine you're in a safe place, or imagine,
right.
You don't have a safe place. Like,
or what if it says go to your parents when you need help, and your parents are actually
abusive, right? And so, yeah, that's actually a huge thing that we hadn't really touched on, but I think is important to note that these are great skills to learn. You have to be very careful how you teach them if there is potential trauma in that area, and how do you do that, because you can't separate kids out and be like, well, you're the traumatized one, so we're going to give you the special class. And some of that, I think some of that is you bring things up at a higher level, like there are ways to think about examples without asking them to go into their own personal life, right? You just give an example of something that's happening in the class or whatnot. And I think there's a higher level of skills that maybe are useful to everyone without kind of digging in. But again, yeah, that's a sticky issue. And I would guess that my answer to that would be, the person who's teaching this class is hopefully not doing it in a group of 30, and maybe has the ability to, maybe a group of 8 or 10, right, but can pull someone aside and be like, hey, that seemed like a difficult class for you, do you want to talk about it a little more? Again, that kind of goes to this whole, like, the program can't be a one-off hour that is random curriculum. It really needs to be fully thought through.
I feel like just to push that just a little bit, though, probably if resources weren't a concern, it would probably be better to have individual one-on-one lessons with all of these kids, right? Otherwise, they might raise their hand and go, I don't like it when my mother touches me, and then maybe you've introduced, I mean, that kid's going to get teased, that kid's going to get, yelled at by, not yelled at, but made fun of by his peers and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for discussing some of this in groups intentionally. Like, I think, you can see a lot better how certain, interpersonal skills, for example, are going to play out when you have two people actually talking about them.
So having this be actually a crucible for testing the things that they're learning.
Sure, potentially, yeah. So I think there is some value to group issue. I mean, yeah, if you want to back this up, I do think in an ideal world, everyone would have access to, kind of their own therapist that they could see on demand for free.
Right.
I think that's even harder than this made up program that's already impossible. I think the last point, though, that I really wanted to bring up about, what if you make things worse? What if you realize, like, ooh, my parents are, in some ways, I would say I was kind of in that situation. My first explorations in therapy kind of were about, my parents are really strict. Like, I can't talk to them about these things. Like, they're gonna get mad at me for having feelings. And it kind of was a difficult time to wrestle with. I love my parents, but these things say they're bad. It was painful. It was also incredibly important for me to do. I think it caused schism between my parents and I for a while. I also think that we might not have any relationship at all if we hadn't done that work when we did it. And that goes to your short-term benefit versus long-term benefit. And again, this is not a claim I'll make very strongly because I really only have personal experience, but yeah. I've seen a lot of people who were in a similar situation to me growing up with parents who were, strict or not understanding, or, whatever term you want to use for that. And the people who haven't confronted it, the people who haven't dealt with it, the people who, that's still the relationship that they have with their parents. I would take at least a slightly strong statement that I am better off in my relationship with my parents for, having had to confront some of the not as pretty stuff.
So I have another question that maybe is a little pointed.
Go for it.
In talking about your reasons for being at 70%, it seems like much of it comes from personal experience.
Sure.
And I wonder, given that your justification comes from personal experience, can you imagine that this experience, that going through therapy might actually affect other people differently? Like actually bringing these things up with their parents might end their relationship, or that having to delve into these things might actually, let's say, ruin their schoolwork or something like that.
Yeah. Yes, and I have an example that I want to give, though I will first mention that I think there are frankly some relationships that are better over than continuing in an abusive fashion. But
fair enough.
Let's leave that to the side.
Okay.
No, I actually have a really good friend who I mentioned that I was going to talk about mental health stuff to her on YouTube a little bit, because she also has a lot of personal experience with the mental health world, and she hates therapy.
Oh, interesting.
She's had a number of really horrible therapeutic experiences to the point where, she sometimes feels she needs mental health stuff at this point, and she's too traumatized by even the idea of trying to open up to someone. So yes, I mean, I can't say that would never happen because I've seen it, play out in front of me happening.
How does that affect your confidence coming from personal experience? How do you integrate that?
So I think part of it is I would like to expand on my personal experience and say, yes, it's personal in my life. It's also personal, and I've run a bipolar support chat room for 6 years now. I'm fairly active on various social media communities with people in mental health. So, I do have this experience of my friend who it has gone very poorly for.
Yeah.
I have my experience where it's gone really well for. I also have this pool of, probably, let's say, at least 50 to 60 people who I've encountered in some detail their experience with. And so I think how I integrate my one's friend experience is that, I rarely say 100% or always or never. Actually, this is an important point. When she comes to me and says, this didn't work because of what reason, when we talk about it, I push her a little bit on, what do you mean the therapist didn't want to do this? What do you like? Why would someone have said that? Because, sometimes she comes and is like, this happened in therapy and it's bad, right? And I'm like, I don't believe that would ever happen because my therapist wouldn't say that, right? And so we'll talk about it a little bit, but I think it's actually really important that, like, I understand why it hasn't worked for her.
Right.
I
If
think,
she's experienced those things were seen as negative by her.
and
So
it's not even just like it's not even just that I heard her say, like, these things were, and it's not even that I heard her and I believe her. It's that I heard her and I asked why, and I understood her justification. And it's not her saying, I think therapy is bad. It's saying therapy hurt me in this way
right.
because of this. And I say, yeah, that would be really hurtful. That is something that could happen in therapy. And I mean, that goes back to, how do you set the program up correctly? How do you put an escape valve in for the kids who are like, whoa, yeah, the thing that's coming up for me is that someone touched me,
Yeah.
last year. Like, this isn't the right, venue for that. Um, it's a totally fair question. I think, it's almost a pros and cons situation. Like, I can't tell you that this sort of thing, even in an ideal situation, is going to be good for 100% of people. Like, it's just not. I don't think there's anything that's good for 100% of
Right.
people.
But your hope is that it helps more people than it harms.
Yeah.
Um, okay. Okay, so we've talked about things that might bring you up the confidence scale. We've talked about things that might bring you down the confidence scale. Do you still feel like you're at 70%?
Um, I mean, to be honest, I've done none of the, additional expert research
Of
or
course, of
personal
course, of
research
course.
or societal research that would, push me. I think we talked a little bit about how I may have gone down a little bit on the just, is this even
Right,
practical? Like, how useful is it to say a program's good if it's utterly impractical?
right.
So I think there's that question. I
And
don't,
and I think maybe this, maybe um, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but maybe talking about this idea that you've also got to weigh the fact that for some people it may be harmful by even this one ladder, sorry, this one side of the scale, the like not thinking about getting rid of history lessons, but just the
right.
therapy itself may be harmful to some people.
Yeah.
Um, because I definitely heard that you appreciate that, like, possibility.
Yeah, I mean, harm reduction is a huge topic that I, would be utterly remiss to not talk about. And, even in one-on-one therapy, you talk about, harm reduction. I had a therapy session in like March or something, right, where we were talking about just my feelings as a parent, whatever. And like in the last 5 minutes, we accidentally like opened up this can of worms, just, whatever. And then the session, kind of had to end
Right,
because,
right.
that's how therapy works.
Yeah,
And that's a situation where I've been in therapy for years, and it messed me up. Like, I spent the next couple of days like very, off kilter, and ended up emailing my therapist and saying, I need another session just to talk about this
yeah.
session. And so yeah, I mean, I can't dismiss that as a very real, concern, a very real thing that happens. And I think to this plan of, I think what this conversation has made me do is, if anything, made me make a list of like all the things the experts need, like the panel of experts that's gonna design this program. Like,
Uh
hey, make sure you do a big thing on harm reduction. Hey, make
huh.
sure you do a big thing on,
Yeah.
I don't think it changes the I don't think it changes that I feel the idea is important,
Uh huh.
but the more I think about things, the, the more I think about things, the the more I think about things, the more I come up with ways that I need to further bulletproof my thinking almost. I don't, it's really easy to have an idea, um, and it's really easy for someone else to tell you that that idea is um, wrong. And I think that my level of confidence is, I have a feeling, I have a very strong feeling, but my level of confidence of how willing I am to put that out there
Right.
is how much of the shield I've built up. Do I have the facts? Do I have the experience? Do I have, other people who, I trust agreeing with me? Um, I don't have all of that, for this situation right now.
Yeah. All right. Great. I think that's a good place to stop.
All right.